And I got some tickets on Friday thinking that you saw what happened, right? There's one winner in Indiana.
Have they figured out who it is yet?
Some stupid person.
The story I heard was that it was sold at like a convenience store along a highway, an interstate, so they think that the person might not even be from Indiana.
Well, I wasn't in Indiana, so it's not me.
I wasn't driving through either.
No.
Christine?
It was not me.
No? Okay.
So and they'll end up with the full, it's only one winner, so they'll get the full $540 million. Unless they take it as a one lump sum.
What's that, like $300 million?
And that's like $350 million. Yeah. So, I don't know. It's that, and I had forgotten, but the last, and Christine, I couldn't remember what it was last year. There was another one last year that was really big. And it ended up being over $1 billion. Wasn't it 1.4, almost $1.5 billion?
I don't remember, but I do remember that it was split between several different people.
Yeah.
Was it in the billions?
It was. Yeah, we had. I remember we were into it because we were doing contests every time the drawing would come up. We'd do a pool and let people get in on the pool. Remember that?
In fact, I remember you had Scott Flansburgh, Human Calculator, on, and I was listening. I was over at the Burn Dairy in Whitesboro getting more lottery
tickets. Right, yeah.
So if we called him and asked him, he may just know what day it was, what the numbers were,
he
and
might
who
remember
won.
that. You're right.
And their social
might very well remember that. Do we have Tanya Powers coming up, too?
Yeah, 6:40.
This the latest as to what's going on in Dallas. We'll give you an update on that. And there have been some local protests. I know that in Syracuse there have been some protests as well. And even the ones that happened in Dallas started out pretty contentious yesterday and last night, but ended up, Christine, turning out to the point where both sides and the police and those protesters were all like shaking hands and hugging when it was all said and done.
So happy that happened that way.
Yeah, I think Dallas is handling this situation very well, considering especially what horrific event. Stuff. I hate to say, but it's usually things like that bring people back together.
They're setting a great example for one
I guess
thing.
they are. Andrew ran in the Boilermaker. You ran the full 15K, right?
I did.
So how did you? How do you think you made out? I saw you. You look pretty good sitting over there palling around with Stefan at the post-race party.
What would you think is a good time? Because he was complaining to me that he was a minute slower than he was last year.
No, it was 2 minutes slower.
2 minutes slower, and so he told me his time, and I'm like, you're upset about that? That's a great time.
You didn't train like you did last year, though.
No.
So what was your time?
So it was an hour and 19 minutes in a second.
An hour and 19.
Which I did an hour 17 last year.
That's really good because I think that anything. Well, think about the cutoff is 2 hours.
Yeah.
So you're well in under that. I think that's a really good time. How about the McKenna kid from New Hartford once again winning the 5K?
4 times in a row.
4th straight win of the 5K race.
Paying for college.
That kid's the wrestler. That's that wrestler from New Hartford. He's a monster.
Yeah. He was also wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, right, Bill?
No, he wasn't.
Listen. That's how he runs. I was talking to somebody the other day, yesterday, that said when he runs, he actually uses some sort of a mask.
Yes.
Like an oxygen mask?
It restricts your oxygen intake.
It restricts the oxygen intake. Can you explain that to me? Because I've never heard of that before.
So when he's training?
Yes.
When he's training.
Yeah, it looks like, if you've seen one of the newer Batmans, Bane wears that mask.
Yeah.
It looks like a mask that Bane wears.
I think I saw him.
I saw him running. I yelled out the window, "You only do the CPAP machine when you're sleeping." And he didn't hear me.
What it does is it restricts your oxygen intake comparable to if you're training in high elevation.
Interesting. Boy,
so
that is incredible.
So then you take it off, obviously, and you're sucking a ton of oxygen in than what you're used to training at.
I don't know if this is there was a McKenna kid that when my son was wrestling for New Hartford a few years back, and he was very young, and I think it's the same kid. This kid was an animal. He was small at the time. I think he might have only been in 7th grade. He was an animal. And I think it's the same kid.
It probably is. It's funny because obviously we cover the Boilermaker every year, and I remember 2 or 3 years ago him winning it, and I'm like, oh, look at the little kid, right?
Yeah.
And like now he's like, I wouldn't get into it with a fight with him. No.
And
He'd kick my butt.
what a wrestler. He's He's a really, really good wrestler. All right, so maybe we'll get. Why don't you book that kid, Andrew? He's worth booking, I think. What do you think?
Him and Manaski can wrestle in the studio.
We'll have him wrestling.
Don't think so.
Actually, we'll compare CPAP masks. All right, Tiny J. Powers on the line right now, and what is the latest in Dallas? It did seem, we were just talking about this, Tanya, that very positive that the way things ended last night between protesters and police.
Right. Well, then there are protests, of course, that took place of the rest of the country.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we've not gotten any reports of anybody being shot or anything like that. Things did get kind of ugly in Baton Rouge there on I-110. A few hundred people tried, aimed for an on-ramp there at the interstate. There was a standoff. Police in riot gear had to move in. Some of the protesters actually got pinned. Some of them left. About 30 to 40 people were taken into custody for trying to block a highway.
Wow.
In Memphis, protesters, Black Lives Matter protesters, had actually left a rally there. I believe it was downtown, and they went and basically blocked the I-40 bridge over the Mississippi River, which connects Arkansas and Tennessee, the major artery of I-40 in that area. That blocked it for several hours. In that one, though, it was interesting because the interim police chief actually went onto the bridge, talked to these protesters, and was able to walk off with many of them with him.
Wow.
I think some of them did come back, but they finally got them, dispersed and everything like that.
Well,
Nothing was violent, but that could have been ugly.
Here is the question that I think is being asked out there right now, is that is this the violence? There's a difference between these quote-unquote the Black Lives Matter protesters and obviously the sniper, this guy that shot and killed 5 police officers in Dallas. But some are saying that he was tied to this militant Black Panther group. And the question is this group the one that is dictating some of the violence and when it happens and where it happens? Are you hearing any of that?
Yeah, well, I'm hearing the same kind of thing you are. Nothing nothing confirmed. I mean, some of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement have said, this is not what they're about, like the violence in Dallas, that kind of thing. As far as, the groups he was associated with, we're hearing the same kind of things. But, right now it's all just kind of out there and sort of speculation and for some of it.
But what I talked about, how this ended last night, it was pretty contentious in Dallas last night. But by the end of it, it seemed that the protesters and police were back to high-fiving and hugging, and it ended in a positive way there.
Which is exactly what one would hope for. I mean, especially the fact that they're planning funerals of police officers. One of them was taken back to his hometown in a procession on Saturday. His funeral service is pending. Officer Brent Thompson, and the funeral for Sergeant Michael Smith is, I believe, on Thursday.
This has really been just we've been looking for a distraction from the presidential race. This is not the distraction we were looking for.
No.
All right, Tiny, thanks so much.
Sure.
Tiny J. Powers, Fox News, and Christine with what?
I was just going to say there was, of course, more protests in Baton Rouge last night. I think 70 were arrested. And then in Rochester, actually, I think Saturday night, 50 people were not arrested but detained. Nobody was charged, I don't believe.
Andrew.
Who would have ever thought, too, and I noticed this a lot over the weekend, the Boilermaker weekend, who would ever thought that we would have police officers that have to carry rifles just because there's the possibility or the threat that something might happen?
Let's talk about that. Because and see if Tim Reed would be available at some point here this morning, because I'd love to talk about you have that aftermath meeting, the meeting that you do when you reflect on everything. But I got to say, the security was tighter at this year's Boilermaker than I've ever seen it. And I did talk to a couple of security people who said, it's just the week that has occurred once again, another troubling week leading up to the Boilermaker that causes security issues. A few years back, you remember, it was the bombing in Boston. Mm-hmm. And now you have this huge mass gathering, and you have to look at it like this could be a target. And we'll talk about it when we come back here. Christine with an update right now. 6:47. Good morning, Christine Bolino.